This hearing will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Good morning, and welcome to a hearing of the Investigations and Oversight Committee of Science, Space, and Technology. We have quite a few people here from throughout the community. I'd like to recognize County Executive Joe DiVincenzo. Thank you for coming. His Chief of Staff, Phil Elijah. From Senator Booker's staff, Zach McHugh. From Senator Menendez's staff, Kasim Gomez. From Representative Gottheimer's staff, Cheryl Cruz. We also have freeholder Carlos Pomares. Councilman Nick Jano. Councilwoman Jenny Mundell. Fire Chief Lou Venezia. Police Director Sam DeMeo. From our Board of Ed, Mr. Tom Heaney. And then I would also like to give a special welcome to our AP students from Bloomfield High School. Thank you all for coming. Well, it's a pleasure to be able to do this field hearing right here in Bloomfield. I wish we could do every hearing here in the district. I'm not sure our Virginian panel members would appreciate that, but I would love it. We're here to talk about an environmental issue that threatens millions of Americans and is hitting our state hard in 2019. A new analysis by New Jersey Future found that over 5 million New Jerseyans may be exposed to lead contamination from water. The Pequannock water system, which serves 500,000 people across Bloomfield, Belleville, and Pequannock Township, and part of Nutley, as well as the western part of Newark, has seen escalating lead levels as far back as 2017. The UN General Assembly and the Human Rights Council recognizes access to safe drinking water as a basic human right. We know in Flint, Michigan, for example, 6,000 to 12,000 children were impacted by unsafe drinking water. When we see contamination that threatens human health, especially the health of our children, we need to deploy all available resources to address it. But in April, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection reported that it could cost up to $2.3 billion to replace all of the lead service lines in New Jersey. So to put that in context, the entire budget of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection in 2018 was $214 million. So it's agonizing for everyone when we see a desperate need for improvement in a public good, but that need comes with a high price tag and a slow timeline. Addressing lead is a diffuse problem where the exposure comes from millions of little pieces of hardware under our yards, in our basements, and up to our taps. So first, let me say how fantastic it is that countless New Jersey state and local officials, the water utilities, and the Department of Health and Environmental Protection have locked arms to confront this issue in recent months. Under Mr. DiVincenzo's leadership, Essex County has extended an incredible $120 million in bond authority to support lead service line replacement in the greater Newark region. Thank you. And just last week, Governor Murphy rolled out a comprehensive lead action plan that will beef up lead testing, public disclosures, and public funding for lead removal efforts. But lead exposure in New Jersey is a kitchen sink problem, and we need to throw everything we have at it. We have two powerful tools in our toolkit: innovation to find solutions that are faster, cheaper, and safer, and public education so that families and businesses can better protect themselves. And in times like these, America's small businesses and university researchers can really shine. In preparing for this hearing, we have run across dozens of brilliant new ideas for tackling lead in drinking water, from new methods for locating lead service lines where they exist, to strategies for getting lead service lines out of the ground at a lower cost and with less disruption. I want to make sure that the federal government is doing everything it can to get these smart ideas out of the lab and into the community. And educating as many people in our community as possible on best practices and available services. So I'm delighted to welcome two panels of distinguished witnesses today to guide our discussion. And here in New Jersey's 11th district, we've been celebrating the contributions of our Italian-American community. And I am proud that we see that on full display here today in panel one. So in panel one, I was told as an Irish American that I'm outnumbered today. So in panel one, I would like to welcome Mayor Venezia, Mayor Scarpelli, and County Executive DiVincenzo. They are on the front lines of the response to New Jersey's lead crisis. And I'm so glad we will have this opportunity to hear what they're hearing so we in Washington can be as responsive as possible. I'm also thrilled to have Congressman Beyer and Congresswoman Wexton here today. I was just informed, something I didn't know, Congresswoman Wexton's maiden name is Ticini, so she's here celebrating as well the contributions to Italian Americans and carrying that banner. Congressman Beyer has been a stalwart champion on clean water throughout his tenure in Congress. Congresswoman Wexton was a tireless environmental advocate when she served in the Virginia State Senate, and she is keeping up the good fight as a member of Congress. And now we just have Congressman Payne here, and Congressman Payne has been laser focused on solutions to address lead exposures his constituents are facing in Newark. We're proud to have him join us today. So with some of the most capable members of Congress on today's panel, we are off to a good start. So I'd like to first ask unanimous consent that Congressman Payne be permitted to join the panel. Without objection. So thank you all for being here today, and I'm looking forward to a good discussion. I now recognize Congressman Payne of Newark for an opening statement.
Good morning. For those who don't know me, I am Congressman Payne, Donald Payne, I'm Congressman Donald Payne Jr., representative from the 10th Congressional District, state of New Jersey, which also represents part of Bloomfield. I want to thank Representative Cheryl for conducting this timely hearing. She's the chair of the Subcommittee on Investigations Oversight for the House Space, Science, and Technology Committee. And I want to thank her for allowing me to participate in today's hearing. Now, I've been working diligently on this crisis since it began and looking to provide federal resources, financial and educational, to help for the issue in Newark that we have seen that has become a crisis. Residents need to know what is being done to improve Newark's water as quickly and effectively as possible. So once again, I thank her for conducting this hearing, and I'm proud to be here today. When I first learned that there were unsafe levels of lead in Newark's drinking water, I was shocked. This is the same water my family and I drink and use to clean our food. It is something I never thought could happen here. For decades, Newark was known for having some of the cleanest, purest water in the country, and it still is. But aging pipes and inadequate filters have taught us that clean water is something we cannot take for granted. That is why I'm doing everything I can to help my constituents during this crisis. In 2016, I introduced the Test for Lead Act into Congress. This bill would establish stronger tests for lead in schools across the country. I've signed on to a letter to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to make sure that we have enough bottled water to supply residents until their drinking water is safe. I have signed on to another letter to the Department of Health and Human Services to make sure none of the tainted water ends up being used for mixed formula for infants. In addition, I've handed out bottled water to constituents at 2 different distribution centers to get an idea of what my constituents are going through on a day-to-day basis. It gave me a chance to meet people affected by the crisis, to discuss their fears about the drinking water and learn what other solutions might be available to help them get through it. No issue is more important than clean drinking water right now. And I know that today's hearing will help clarify the actions taken to clean that water and protect the health of our residents. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Payne, and thank you for being here today. I also just want to recognize Senator Ruiz. Thank you so much for coming. And then all the way from Morris County, we have Mayor Grazel. Thank you for coming. At this time, I'd like to introduce the witnesses for our first panel. First, we have the County Executive of Essex County, New Jersey, Mr. Joseph DiVincenzo.
Is it on now?
Yep.
Essex County is very, very fortunate to have 2 great congresspeople that represent Essex County, Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill and Congressman Donald Payne. Congresswoman Sherrill, I just want to thank you for hosting this meeting here in Essex County. We surely appreciate it. I don't remember any committee hearing here. Maybe Congressman Payne could correct me. Did you ever have one of your committee meetings here?
I've had 3 since I've been in Congress, yes. Thank you.
In Essex County?
In Essex County, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Phil gave me the wrong information, Phil Elijah.
Members of Congress are often underappreciated here in New Jersey.
Congresswoman Wexton and Congressman Byer, I want to thank you also for being here in Essex County. We have a slogan, put in Essex County first, so welcome to Essex County. I just want you, don't take it the wrong way that you see 3 Italians to the right-hand side here. Essex County has 22 towns. We have over 800,000 people, and our strength in this county is our diversity. It just so happens there to be 3 Italians up here, Venezia and Scarpelli, great elected officials. Congresswoman Sherrill, thank you for holding this subcommittee meeting in Bloomfield, Essex County. The presence of lead in our drinking water causes us all great concern and creates a public health emergency. The public was first alerted to high levels of lead in the drinking water in Newark in 2017. Since then, the city has been chemically treating the water to help recoat the service lines, pass out bottled waters, and distribute filters. All of these initiatives address the immediate issue of providing clean drinking water to our residents. However, in the many discussions which I participated, the only permanent solution is to replace lead service lines with copper pipes. Although Essex County does not maintain a municipal water system, I recognize that this is a public health concern and drastic measures needed to be taken. Newark has started a program to replace the 18,000 service lines, but it would have taken Newark at least a decade to complete the task given the fiscal restraints of the city. This includes digging up the old lines and replacing the lead piping lines with copper piping. In order to speed up the process, I realized that Newark needed a quick infusion of cash, which would allow the city to hire more contractors and get the work done more quickly, reducing the amount of time to 24 to 30 months. Because of our AAA bond rating we received in 2017, Essex County and our Improvement Authority were in a good position to help. With the AAA rating, the highest rating available, which indicates financial strength, we were able to bond $120 million and loan that to Newark at a low interest rate. Newark is then repaying the bond over 30 years, period, and is not charging the property owners to have the pipe replacement done. We have extended the same program to Bloomfield, Nutley, and Belleville, which purchase water from the city of Newark. As of today, we know our municipal partners in those three communities are still doing their due diligence to determine if this program is feasible for them. But let's be honest, replacing the lead service lines can be and probably will affect all our communities throughout our county, state, and country, sooner or later. Homes built before 1950 probably were constructed with lead service lines. How long will the chemical treatment be effective in coating the interior service lines so the lead doesn't leach into the supply? Again, the only real solution is to replace lead service lines, which can be expensive for any property owner. Are there more modern, advanced alternatives that may be more affordable and less disruptive? Currently, property owners are inconvenienced when the roads in front of their property and front yard are dug up. No matter how the pipes are replaced, cost will always be the biggest concern. In Essex County, we stepped up to the plate and backed the investment with a $120 million loan. Senator Cory Booker sponsored legislation that makes $100 million available to Newark and other municipalities to replace lead service lines. So while this committee investigates ways to streamline the lead service lines replacement, we also ask that you consider how much it will cost our municipalities and property owners. Thank you, Congresswoman Sherrill.
Thank you, County Executive DiVincenzo. Next, I'd like to recognize Mayor Joseph Scarpelli of Nutley, New Jersey, for 5 minutes.
Good morning.
Morning.
Chairwoman Sherrill and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about lead in drinking water. I hope I can enlighten you on some of the issues our small town of Nutley, New Jersey, and the surrounding municipalities have been experiencing. Although the issue of lead in drinking water received its most recent publicity in Newark, lead pipes exist throughout the country and will continue to plague us until all those lines are replaced. As a mayor of a small town, and as a result of this recent issue, my knowledge about lead pipes, water treatment, and water testing has grown to a level I did not expect. Despite the known dangers of lead pipes, they continue to be installed for years, as it was less expensive, more durable than other options, and could be easily bent. Lead enters drinking water when plumbing materials that contain lead corrode. The most common sources of lead in drinking water are from lead pipes, faucets, and fixtures. It is important to understand the way the water enters the home. The water is collected in reservoirs, travels through transmission lines to the various utilities. Through an interconnection, the water enters the municipality's water mains. Attached to the water mains are service lines, which deliver the water to each property. The service line has two sections, one from the main and one to the curb shutoff, and another from the shutoff to the house, and then the water passes into the internal plumbing of the home. Homes with lead service lines are the most significant source of lead in water. If lead concentrations exceed 15 parts per billion in more than 10% of water sampled, the local water system must undertake actions to control corrosion. Corrosion is the dissolving or erosion of metal caused by a chemical reaction between the water and the plumbing. Many factors affect the amount of lead that's entering the water, including the pH of the water temperature, the age of the pipes, how long the water sits in the pipes, and the presence of protective coatings inside the plumbing material. The Newark crisis came to light in 2017 when the city reported elevated lead levels. Newark Water had been using sodium silicate for corrosion control. How sodium silicate works is really unknown, but it definitely raises the pH, making the water less corrosive. Somewhere along the way, the pH of water coming out of the Newark water system became neutral to acidic, which allowed lead to leach into the water. In May 2019, Newark switched to zinc orthophosphate for corrosion control. Orthophosphate is the more effective corrosion control additive, but takes months to be completely effective. The Township of Nutley has 2 water suppliers. There are 436 homes that are supplied by Newark Water, accounting for less than 5% of our total homes and businesses. The rest of our township receives water through another supplier. When the media and newspaper accounts reported that the water filters distributed to Newark residents had failed, there was a public outcry, and the EPA and NJDEP took action. We in Nutley have participated in many meetings and calls with the NJDEP, the Governor's Office, County Executive DiVincenzo, Mayor Venezia, and other elected officials for updates on Newark Water and the effect on our community. After consultation with our professionals, Nutley has taken proactive measures to address the situation. We encourage all residents to run their water for 1 to 2 minutes each morning. We have begun replacing all known lead service lines. Unfortunately, record keeping over the years has been inconsistent. Therefore, we must undertake the labor-intensive work of investigating what type of service lines exist beneath the ground. This process involves hand digging to see if lead exists on either side of the curb shutoff. If lead lines are found, they must be removed or abandoned and replaced with a new copper line. The cost of this process across our entire town will be exorbitant. We have also initiated a study to determine the steps needed to switch to a different water supplier. We provided free testing of tap water and free lead testing of children. Thankfully, all our testing has been negative. Although lead has been our primary concern, our township is also dealing with elevated levels of haloacidic acid from the same Newark water source. Haloacidic acids are formed when disinfectants such as chlorine react with organic and inorganic matter in our source water. In July 2019, Newark changed their disinfection process. Hopefully, these changes decrease the disinfection byproducts. In the meantime, we had to notify our residents that drinking the water over many years may increase their risk of cancer. In conclusion, let me offer some ideas that this committee can look into. Technology that offers the ability to detect water lines underground without having to excavate. The development of new anti-corrosive water treatments and technologies that offer superior protection from not only lead, but also prevent copper from leaching into our water supply. Innovative, cost-effective physical, chemical, or biological water treatments that eliminate bacteria, control disinfection byproducts, and eliminate any unpleasant color, odor, and taste. Our collective goal is to continue to offer all our residents clean, safe drinking water. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mayor Scarpelli. And our final witness for the panel is Mayor Michael Venezia of Bloomfield, New Jersey. And Mayor, thank you so much for hosting us here in Bloomfield today as well.
Good morning, Chairwoman. I would like to welcome you and your colleagues from the House of Representatives to Bloomfield, my colleague from Nutley, and our county executive and other distinguished guests here this morning. I would like to also thank the witnesses and look forward to hearing your testimonies. My name is Michael Venezia. I am the mayor of Bloomfield. As everyone in this room knows, over the past couple of years, the City of Newark, Township of Bloomfield, Belleville, and Nutley have experienced high concentrations of lead in the water to varying degrees. Moreover, this issue is not limited to this part of New Jersey, but in fact a growing problem throughout the state and in the United States. Chairwoman Sherrill has given me the opportunity to address what the Township of Bloomfield has done to remediate this critical issue. We appreciate this opportunity. To begin, my town gets its water from a shared system with the City of Newark. We are termed the consecutive water system. We purchase all our water from the Newark water system. We do not have the facilities to treat or manage the quality of water we receive from Newark system. However, since 2017, we have been testing the quality of water as it comes into the township. In the fall of 2017, the township learned it had a lead exceedance beyond which was acceptable under the federal EPA regulations. While the exceedance level was barely over the federal limit, it still existed and prompted the township to take action to resolve the matter as best as possible. In November 2017, we held a public hearing to inform our residents of the issue and how to protect themselves from the potential of lead contamination. At that time, we embarked on a program to discover those locations in town where lead existed in the pipes. What was clear at the time and remains to this day is we did not find lead exceedance levels in the township's water mains. We learned that the nature of the water we received from the city of Newark had components that produced a corrosive reaction in the lead water lines. Bloomfield Water Department distributed education material on lead to each one of our water customers. The notice also described the potential serious health effects associated with lead, as well as sources of lead in drinking water. Bloomfield took steps that each resident can take to reduce their exposure to lead in drinking water. Bloomfield informed the customers via education materials that homes with known lead service lines should use extra precaution when flushing their water lines. We instructed these customers with known lead lines or high lead test results to flush their water for up to 5 minutes by running the cold water from the tap if the water had gone unused for more than 6 hours. Users without known lead lines were advised to flush their system for 60 seconds before use their homes could still contain internal pipes or fixtures with lead-containing materials. Further, we started working with the City of Newark to address the issues of water quality. In August 2018, our second round of testing indicated we still had homes in the township whose water exceeded the acceptable lead levels. We again held a public hearing to advise our residents, along with sending the mandatory written notification to every household and businesses within the township. Additionally, we started providing free, pure water filters in an effort to assist our residents who believe that lead was in their water. Thus far, Bloomfield has distributed nearly 3,000 pure filters to residents, and we continue to do so this day. We also started an in-house township program of replacing lead service lines that we discovered in the areas where formal testing showed lead exceedance of over 15 parts per billion. At the same time, we applied for a low-interest loan from the New Jersey Infrastructure Bank in the amount of $1.1 million to fund more repairs where we found lead service lines. To date, I am happy to report that we've repaired over 60 lead service lines using mostly township staff. We have also retained a contractor to replace an additional 60 lines over the next 2 months. Since November 2017, we have provided self-testing kits to any resident who wanted their water tested. Since that time, we have submitted over 600 tests, most of them coming back with no indication of lead. Any test that comes back in exceedance of 15 parts per billion for lead, we have or will investigate and schedule a replacement of the discovered lead lines. It is important to note that only way to be sure there are lead lines is to dig the service connection to the property and physically examine the line itself. Clearly, this cannot be done easily or quickly. Plus, it requires staff or contractors to perform. In August, while the Bloomfield was making these repairs and providing information to our residents, there was a test of pure water filters used by Newark residents that indicated the filters were not working. Frankly, this created a panic. On August 19, 2019, we held our third public hearing on this matter. In the previous 2 public hearings, although advertised the same way, we had no more than 20 people attend those hearings. This hearing had over 150 people in attendance, all very upset and concerned about their water quality. Clearly, the panic generated by the EPA's demand to distribute bottled water in Newark brought greater attention and a lot of confusion to Bloomfield residents. Bloomfield has taken many steps to improve our water quality. Over the past 4 years, we have invested over $10 million in improvements to our system. We have eliminated dead-end lines, started a systematic water flushing and valve exercising program. We are in the second phase of our major water relining program, an investment of over $1 million. Furthermore, we are in the final design phase of 2 major improvements to our system. First, we are investing nearly $2.5 million to change our water supply from Newark's water treatment plant at the Pequannock Reservoir to North Jersey Water District system at the Wanacue Reservoir. We believe this will help our water quality and provide a redundance of supply. Second, we have started a $6 million water meter replacement program. The timing of this is significant. During installation of the meters, the contractor will inspect the exposed water lines for any lead, including lead solder. As mentioned before, locating lead in homes is very difficult and many residents do not know if they have lead lines. This will help us and our residents know if that type of piping is present. For Bloomfield, and I imagine all the municipalities who are facing this problem, the need for assistance is extensive. To be sure, financial assistance is a critical matter. We have spent over $500,000 in the last 2 years on additional testing fees, line replacement, distribution of filters, and every form of public information possible, none of which was planned or anticipated. When I think of the money that our residents will have to pay, let alone the anxiety of not knowing, I believe there needs to be some form of assistance from our federal government. We will literally spend millions in Bloomfield alone. We need help. Further, the time that it takes to make these repairs or even investigate the lines is too long. We need both the federal and state governments to assist us with the procurement of additional help from qualified contractors. As I mentioned before, we have secured $1.1 million to replace our lead lines, but that process took months to secure the funding. Our people want repairs now, not to be told that they have to wait 8 to 12 months. We need help. As I said before, Bloomfield is a consecutive water system. We purchase all of our water fully treated from Newark. While we continue to work with our neighbors to resolve this matter, we hope that the federal and state governments will continue to aggressively assist the City of Newark in fully complying with the EPA clean water regulations. We need your assistance now. We are talking about millions, actually I would estimate billions of dollars in order to protect our residents. In the meantime, Bloomfield has and will continue to do everything we can within our water limits as a consecutive water system customer to protect and advise our customers. Chairman Sherrill, I want to just thank you for your time and opportunity to be here this morning.
Thank you so much to our first panel. We'll now start. The chair is going to recognize herself. I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions for the panel. And we'll start with Mr. DiVincenzo. So Essex County is supporting the Newark region with bonding authority so that property owners won't be charged for pipe replacement, which is a critical component to managing this problem. I want to clarify, so County Executive DiVincenzo, this will enable homeowners to have both the public and private side of their lead pipes replaced at no cost to them, is that correct?
That is, first of all, it's only going on in Newark now. It's not happening in Bloomfield, Belleville, because and Nutley, because they're still doing their due diligence there, decide what they're doing. You got me? It's not working? Now you can hear. This right now is just for Newark only, because they're the ones who agreed to take on the $120 million loan as far as borrowing it. Does not affect Belleville, Nutley, or Bloomfield. And Newark is, all the work that's being done is at no cost to the property owners.
Who will be responsible for doing the replacements? The water utilities?
Newark will be responsible for doing that, and they have contractors who they have hired to do that work.
Oh, great. And then how can homeowners who wish to take advantage of this opportunity get the ball rolling?
You know, what they have to do is just contact the City of Newark and the Newark Water Storage Commission and contact them and let them know that they're interested.
And I just want to get, this is just for the record, so we can get this on the record, but we've heard testimony from Mayor Venezia about how expensive the cost of lead remediation is, and I assume Essex County has competing needs for the bond authority that you've extended. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, we do, but to us, this was a priority. It's a public health issue. So I decided to, you know, there's no way I could make our residents wait for a whole decade to this be completed. So I wanted to shore up the timetable, so I met with Mayor Roadblocks and his team. We met with the Port Authority from our team, and we came together and we came up with a solution how we can get this thing done within 24 to 30 months. And I can tell you right now, it's going very well. The replacement, I think they got approximately about 1,400 done, maybe more at this particular time. I've seen it in process. It's going well. It's going well.
But if we could find a less expensive way, less expensive technology to mitigate lead issues, would that be helpful?
Absolutely. Anything that's going to save money and get it done quicker, we're all for it.
Certainly. Thank you very much. And Mayor Scarpelli, as part of your duties, you oversee the Nutley Water Department. Can you talk to the committee and walk through the process and what it's like for homeowners when they get a lead service line replacement?
Sure. Well, one, you have to, like I explained before, there's two sections of the service line. One from the main to the shutoff, which is normally, that's the city-owned or the utility-owned. And then one from the shutoff to the home, which under normal circumstances would be the homeowner's responsibility. So you either have to dig up that lead line on both sides of the shutoff and replace it with copper, or you leave it abandoned, and then it has to be hooked up by a plumber into the water meter on the inside of the home. Policy decisions going forward by all the municipalities would be, what do we do on that private side? What do we do on the homeowner side? Newark has taken the initiative to, they're going to replace that at the cost on the utility. As we evaluate what it's going to cost, we will make that decision later on.
Yeah, Congresswoman, Newark has decided to go from the main all the way to the private, to the water meter itself.
Great. And then, Mayor Venezia, in your testimony, you described the episode in August where tests showed that the pure water filters distributed to residents of Bloomfield, Belleville, and Newark were not working. So I understand why this led to a sense of panic. Can you explain what the conclusion eventually was about those filters? And can we tell the people today that you can usually trust filters that are certified to remove lead?
So when we got the news, it was 3 filters from the city of Newark that still had high exceedance of lead from the EPA. But so in Bloomfield, we decided to test 5 homeowners that we knew had lead lines of high exceedance that also had pure filters, and all 5 of those came back below the 15 parts per billion that the EPA recommends. In the city of Newark, they did extensive testing. I believe there was over 300 pure filters, and I think the number was 98% came back that were under 15 parts per billion.
Great. Well, thank you so much to our first panel. Before we proceed, I'd like to bring the committee's attention to 2 statements. The first is from NACE International Professional Organization that equips communities with tools to address the adverse effects of corrosion. The second is from Blue Conduit, a water infrastructure company that uses data analytics and machine learning to predict which homes have lead service lines. These documents highlight just 2 of the innovative groups my staff and I spoke to in preparation for this important field hearing. So thank you for your hard work in addressing an issue that is impacting communities across our country. Without objection, I'll enter these documents into the record. At this point, we will begin our first round of questions, and the chair recognizes, I already did my questions. And so next I would like to recognize Congressman Beyer for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you for the invitation to come to New Jersey. It's a pleasure to be here and actually be not just on the turnpike, but actually in the communities. And thank you very much to our panel, our witnesses. Well, I thought that local elected politics was the most difficult form because you are so close to the people and you know exactly what's going on. Mayor Scarpelli, in your testimony, you talked about the technology that offers the ability to detect lead water lines underground without having to excavate, and hundreds of millions of dollars in saving. I just want to follow up on comments that Chairman Sherrill just made about machine learning statistical models, like Blue Conduit and 120 Water Audit. precision or hydro vacuuming, and remote sensing techniques, and recommend all of them to you and to your associates as the ways that technology is moving forward to avoid having to dig up to find out where the lead line is or not. One of the testimonies we read today was that something like 2/3 of the ones you're digging up aren't lead, but you don't know that until you've actually dug it up. Mr. County Executive DiVincenzo, you wrote that the only permanent solution is to replace lead service lines with copper lines. Have you guys looked, I know you have a huge county, first or second largest in New Jersey, at filters, epoxy lining, threading, the slip lining, some of the other methods of doing it? Yeah.
Congressman, you know, we're open to anything. I have not heard of that right now. The only thing I got from my people is the replacing the lead line. That would be the most effective at this time. But I'm willing to learn. I know my people are willing to learn to see if that could be done. If it could be done quicker and save money, we're all for it.
Well, the only reason I know to ask you this question is the excellent research that Mikey Sherrill's staff has already done on this. So we will pass that research on to you.
Okay.
Because it sounds like there are at least alternatives evolving for this. And then finally for Mayor Venezia, one of the startling things was that in a lead testing earlier this year in Newark's water supply, from January 1st to June 30th, they found that the level got to 52 parts per billion, which is 3.5 times higher than what the EPA says is healthy. So you've had all these self-testing kits, but then there was also a note that the EPA discovered, let me see if I can find the note, that a June 2019 EPA study just 4 months ago said that the current lead and copper rule sometimes miss peak lead concentrations. So the question again, back to Mikey Sherrill's wonderful research, is do you have access yet to the many different ideas that are coming forward on how you test for lead? Everything from platinum electrode sensors to carbon nanotube testing.
So
This is with the fear that those self-testing kits are not going to prove to be fairly accurate.
Well, so right now what we're doing, so we don't have an accurate count of lead service lines in Bloomfield right now. There were some fixed in the 70s and 80s, and as you know, in government, records aren't exactly always kept the best. So it's actually fortunate timing for us because we're going around and fixing each house's water meter reader, and as the contractor that's doing that is going to look for us to see if there's a lead service line, and then we'll go out and fix it for the homeowner. So we don't have an accurate count. So I know like some towns are using every house built before 1950, where that's kind of not an accurate count because you don't know if the homeowner did something on their own. But yes, I saw Congresswoman Sherrill's the new document and the new way of testing, and that's something we could look into in the future.
Great. I don't want to suck up to the chairman of our committee, but I want to say it's wonderful that she's gathered all this data to use in New Jersey and throughout the country. So, and Madam Chair, I yield back.
That's kind, but I have to give most of that credit to my staff for doing that, but thank you very much. Next, I would like to recognize Congresswoman Wexton, the former Tosini, Ms. Tosini, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Early Childhood Center at Forest Glen for hosting us. I know that we can be kind of disruptive when we come to town, so I very much appreciate your allowing us to use this fine venue. And thank you to the panelists for coming. Let me see if it's... Hello? Okay, there we go. It is quite alarming to hear what the residents of Essex County have been faced with, and we know that as time goes by, it's not a matter of if, it's when other municipalities are going to be going through the same thing. This has become a part of the public awareness after what happened in Flint and what's happened here, but even in our own home state of Virginia, we have many, many places that have elevated levels of lead that are going to need to be dealt with. And experts tell us that as long as lead service lines remain in the ground and more proactive measures aren't taken to reduce risk, one American city after another is likely to go through what you guys have been through. I know that there are measures that can be taken with chemical additives to change the acidity or alkalinity of the waters, and there are innovative measures with epoxy coatings for these pipes as well, but those seem like second-best measures, and we don't know what the collateral impacts of those can be. So it seems that removing the pipes is really the best and only way to make sure that the risk is averted. And my question for all of you, because you have had to deal with this and be on the front lines and kind of the tip of the spear for the rest of us in the country, is if you had one piece of advice for executives or for leaders in other towns and counties where this will become an issue, what would that piece of advice be?
Congresswoman, I want to clarify, because Congressman Wexman, the county doesn't control, we don't have a water system that we actually control. That's all done by the municipalities and stuff, the 22 municipalities. But the thing, what I would say is, we've been very fortunate here, is, we're one county, 22 towns, and we're able to communicate on a daily basis and what's going on. And when there is an emergency in any situation, no matter what town is there, we all get together and make sure we do the right thing here. And I have to tell you, the leaders of these particular towns, you could hear from the Nutley, you heard from Bloomfield, and also from Newark, that they've been doing the right thing.
I think the first piece of advice would be, because of both Newark and Flint, it was the water chemistry that got changed that caused the problem. So the first thing would be to make sure that you have, you don't change that chemistry, you don't mess with it. If it's working, keep it the way it is. The second piece of advice is to be proactive. When you have your water departments going out there, making repairs, and they encounter lead lines, replace them then. That is something we've been doing for the last 5 to 10 years in Nutley, and we'll continue to do that. We're just going to have to move up the process now because of the crisis. But be proactive, change those lines out as you come across them.
Yeah, just following up what Mayor Scarpelli said, being proactive communication-wise and just getting as much information out there about the lead service lines, the lead in your water, and being there for the public. Obviously, like one of our community meetings, we had over 150 people there, and I literally sat there for 3 hours just taking every question possible. But it worked. The more information you get out there to the people, the more they'll understand and see that you have a plan and what's going on. So.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you, Congresswoman Wexton. Next, I would like to recognize Congressman Payne for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me just first say that when this initially was found in a school in Newark, I had just come back from Flint, Michigan, observing the issue around water there. And I was in the company of several mayors from the 10th District, and I expressed to them my concern of what I saw in Flint, and that they needed to start really paying attention and checking their water systems. And lo and behold, that Tuesday, it was found in a school, Louise A. Spencer, in Newark. And it had been an issue that had been going on for quite some time. And what they were doing at the Newark school system was flushing the lines in the morning. But I think over a period of time, staff changes, people get a little more complacent, and then lo and behold, the issue was brought to the attention of the residents of Newark. And so the other thing that, I just want to make clear is when we talk about the source of the water, Newark's source, the reservoir, is fine. It is when it comes down through the system and hits the lead service lines is where the issue becomes. In Flint, the water source was changed and was an impure source of water. So from the source, Flint had issues. Our issue starts at the service lines going into the homes. I'd just like to once again commend our local elected officials for their proactiveness in supporting their towns in this issue, and also to the county executive for looking and seeing a issue and stepping in and helping find a solution. It's not the first time that he's done that for the city of Newark. In another administration, he was able to support that community. But it just goes to show, when people ask, what county government does, this are two really good examples of what county government can do in helping support the communities in which they find themselves. So I just want to commend the county executive once again for stepping up and stepping in and filling a void where the residents and the administration in Newark weren't sure how long this was going to take. My one question would be to the mayors. So in light of this, you were looking at other sources of water as opposed to the Newark system?
So we are in the process of switching. So far, 60% of our residents in probably about 18 months to 2 years will be switched over to the North Jersey District Water Supply, which gets their water from the Wanacue Reservoir. We're coming up with a 5 to 10 year plan to be 100% to the Wanacue Reservoir for the North District Water Supply. We were able to connect at one point in the township. That was a abandoned gas station that the township now owns, and we will be putting a water pumping station at that location.
Congressman, yes, so we have the 436 homes in Nutley receive Newark water. The rest of the homes receive Passaic Valley water. The issue with those homes that are receiving Newark is a pressure issue. There's not enough pressure for the Passaic Valley water to get up to those homes that are on higher elevations. Newark has a little increase in pressure, so it's been 100 years that Newark water has supplied those homes. We're in the process to see what we have to do to switch everyone over to Passaic Valley water. That's what we're doing.
Madam Chair, I yield back.
Well, thank you so much to our witnesses for your testimony today. I know that many of us here on this panel and in Congress have spoken to Representative Kildee, who serves Flint, Michigan, and I think the lack of attention to the problem there by public officials was incredibly disheartening. So to see the attention that this is getting here in New Jersey is impressive, and I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you very much to everyone who was here today. So we're now going to have a short break while we seat our next panel of witnesses. Thank you. Welcome back. At this time, I would like to introduce our second panel of witnesses. First, we have Dr. Diane Calello. Dr. Calello is the Executive Medical Director at the New Jersey Poison Information and Education System. If you could please take your conversations into the hallway as we begin our next session. Thank you. She is also an Associate Professor of Energy Medicine at Rutgers University. Dr. Marc Edwards is a Distinguished Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. Mr. Michael Ramos is a Chief Engineer at Chicago Public Schools. He is also the inventor of the NOAA auto flushing device for lead mitigation. And last, we have Dr. Eric Roy, the founder of Hydroviv, a home water filtration company based in Washington, D.C. So we will start with Dr. Calello.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you to Chairwoman Sherrill and Congressman Beyer, Congresswoman Wexton, Congressman Payne, and everyone convened here for inviting me to speak on the health effects of lead exposure. So as a medical toxicologist, I have seen firsthand many patients with the health effects of lead exposure, and as a pediatrician, I've witnessed the unique effects of lead on the young child. As director of the state's only poison control center, we have advised and assisted in several drinking water lead contamination incidents, most recently in our own city of Newark. I'm very glad to be here today to find the way forward for this critically important issue in public health. Lead is ubiquitous in our environment, is even found in the Earth's crust. It's been with us since the beginning of recorded time. It is thought to have poisoned Roman aristocrats and metal workers in colonial America. And many sources in our environment have been removed. For example, leaded automotive gas and leaded food cans with leaded solder. So advances have been made, but hazards remain. And this includes, first and foremost, deteriorating residential lead paint in older homes, but also cultural sources, occupational hazards, and of course, drinking water. At the New Jersey Poison Center, most cases with lead poisoning we manage are in children exposed to that residential paint who suffer adverse developmental consequences. Although paint for interior residential surfaces was banned in 1976, lead paint remains in older homes, and when it peels or falls into disrepair, it fills a child's home with a fine particulate dust that gets first onto their hands and then into their mouth. You know, this is a 2 or a 3-year-old child. Children in these situations have very elevated lead levels and demonstrate developmental delay, attention deficit, behavioral and cognitive challenges, conduct disorder, and loss of intellect. They may need hospitalization and even chelation therapy, which removes lead from the bone, but does very little to reverse the effects on the brain. Children like these have very elevated lead levels in the blood, far above the CDC threshold of 5 micrograms per deciliter. However, it has become increasingly clear that even very small elevations in blood lead are harmful to the developing brain. This was demonstrated in the work of Canfield in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2003, who showed that in a population, the higher the blood lead levels in that population of children, the lower the IQ. And the IQ loss per point of blood lead level was actually steepest at the lowest range. So a child with a blood lead level of 30, which is very elevated, is worse off than a child with a lead level of 10. But a lot more damage is done in that first 10 points than in the subsequent 20. And this has been demonstrated by multiple studies and can be seen in Figure 1 of my written testimony. For this reason, the CDC lowered the threshold from 10 to 5 in 2012, and further lowering is anticipated. These small blood lead level elevations are precisely what has been reported with lead-contaminated municipal drinking water. So both in Washington, D.C. and Flint, Michigan, the cities experienced a rise in the number of children with elevated lead at the time of water contamination. Both Dr. Edwards, to my right, and Dr. Hannah Atisha demonstrated that the prevalence of children with elevated levels doubled or even tripled after their water lead level rose. Of note, no child had severely elevated levels as a result of drinking water alone, and no child required hospitalization. But lead-contaminated drinking water can feasibly be expected to cause more children to have higher lead levels and subsequent loss of IQ. A common misconception is that lead in drinking water is an immediately life-threatening exposure, and that is not the case. And that's an important message to communities who have fear about whether they are acutely poisoned or at acute threat at this moment to their life. So risk communication is challenging in these situations and requires very careful messaging. People in cities with drinking water lead require attentive guidance about preventing further exposure from all sources, including flushing drinking water, many of the strategies we've talked about already today, logistics of obtaining bottled water, but also minimizing paint dust and other sources of lead in the environment. But these communities also require attentive and cautious reassurance and recognition of any developmental effects as they arise. Knowledge is power, and if a child has a delay, catching it early and intervening can make a tremendous difference. Here in New Jersey, we have higher lead levels than the national average, and the city of Newark has the greatest number of children with high lead levels than the other cities. Now, some of that is because many more children in Newark get tested, but we know that the problem is certainly in the city of Newark. The sources vary, but this is mostly attributable to lead paint. The contribution of drinking water has not yet been determined, and more recent statistics are not yet available. Families can receive services through the city, as well as our Poison Control Center, regarding how to mitigate exposure to lead in the environment. Newark also has important resources like funded relocation housing and a partnership for lead-safe children. But as lead levels continue to be elevated, environmental hazards continue to persist, and the threshold continues to appropriately be lowered. Resources statewide and nationally risk depletion. Municipal water crises are complicated and require a great many decisions, often in the context of fear, outrage, and distrust. How do we fix the water? How do we contact citizens? By phone, by door to door? What do we tell them? Should we use filters? What kind? Where can people go for information? Should we offer universal testing? Who's most at risk? So many questions. I urge the subcommittee to consider one advance in this area, aside from all the important advances we're talking about to remove lead from water, is to craft a municipal playbook for cities in the future who face water crises. Deploying the right expertise at the right time can make a tremendous difference. And Flint was not the first city to face this issue, and Newark will certainly not be the last. And guidance, formal guidance for cities, I think would be tremendously useful. So in conclusion, while drinking water is only one source of lead exposure, removing this hazard is imperative. So too is addressing other sources. And the prioritization of lead hazard reduction is complex. But we must envision a future in which our water and our homes are lead-free. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And before we move to our next witness, I simply want to recognize Assemblyman Caputo. Thank you so much for coming today, sir. Thank you. And next, we're going to hear from Dr. Marc Edwards, who is the Distinguished Professor from VPI.
Thank you. I'll start by noting that this is the fifth time I've testified to Congress on this issue in relation to lead in drinking water crises. The first two were in relation to Washington, D.C. in 2004, 2010, and then twice again in 2016 in Flint, Michigan. And I'm really optimistic that today's hearing related to this water lead problem in New Jersey is going to help bring an end to our ongoing national nightmare. So I want to start by noting that approaches to dealing with the lead and water problem around the world vary. For instance, in Australia, they tell consumers, frankly, that they're on their own and that they don't consider lead and water to be a significant public health threat. And other countries take some responsibility for protecting consumers from lead. But our approach in the United States has been the worst of all worlds. Essentially, too frequently, people are being told that they're being protected from lead and water when that's not the case. And when you couple that with our public health warnings that there's no safe level of lead exposure, with warnings of brain damage and other horrific health consequences, you have a basis for undermining trust and panic and water crises, and that's what's happened over and over again. And unfortunately, we have severely damaged the public trust and public confidence in water supplies in the United States as a result of this problem. Too many of our poorest and most vulnerable citizens are spending too much of their precious financial resources worried about lead in water, testing for lead in water, protecting themselves, purchasing filters. And our nation's failure to upgrade this antiquated infrastructure and to uphold federal law has really effectively ended trust in potable water in this country as we once knew it. And the following steps could really help go a long way towards restoring justifiable trust in U.S. public water supplies and prevent future water crises. So first and foremost, the culture associated with implementation and enforcement of this law in the United States has really been just a national scandal. Whatever the provisions of the new lead and copper rule are, it must be enforced and it must be taken seriously. And as an aside, I was very pleased to see that the US EPA was not as complicit in the problems that occurred in Newark as they have been in water problems that occurred in the recent past. The second issue is that the current official language that there is no safe level of lead exposure should be reconsidered. We routinely identify consensus standards of human exposure for other contaminants below which health risks are considered relatively low, and we should do the same for lead. The no safe level of lead exposure language is actually proving to be an impediment to fixing the problem at its core, which is replacing lead in our plumbing, and its increasing dependency on bottled water and filters. We also must eventually identify where these millions of lead service line pipes are and where they are not. And this is a major, major challenge. Consumers have to be made fully aware when they have to live with this hazard, and they should be given some relative peace of mind if they do not have a lead pipe in front of their house. And ultimately, these lead pipes do have to be replaced. But until that day comes, and I'm resigned to the fact that it's probably not going to happen in my lifetime or my children's lifetime at our current rates of pipe replacement, we do have to do a better job of protecting consumers with filters, with bottled water, and with corrosion control and flushing strategies. And the US EPA and HUD have been investing in research in these areas that can help us improve our response. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, I would just like to recognize our school superintendent, Sal Goncalves. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. And next we have Mr. Michael Ramos, who is the chief engineer at the Chicago Public Schools.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for holding this hearing today and inviting me here to testify. My name is Michael Ramos, the inventor of NOAA, the auto flusher. I have over 30 years' experience in building automation, electrical engineering, direct digital control, and HVAC. I'm an engineer for Chicago Public Schools and the chief engineer of Von Steuben High School. I'm going to talk to you today about the NOAA device. NOAA was originally designed to be attached to the lead service line in my home to automatically flush for 3 minutes every 3 hours. In 2016, I began following the Flint water crisis and quickly discovered water standing inside the pipes for long periods of time can generate high lead and copper levels. I also discovered water treatment plants across the country use orthophosphates to coat the pipe's interior as a measure of corrosion control. In order for the orthophosphate to be effective, it has to be routinely applied and by running water through the pipes. I used this information to create an auto flusher that I attached to the main lead service line of my home. I believe this will be an effective way to prevent stagnation and effectively apply and maintain a protective barrier of orthophosphates for my family. Later that year, Chicago Public Schools began testing all schools in the district. initial test results showed that 37% of the schools had at least one fixture test above the 15 part per billion action level. As an engineer in the school system, it is my responsibility to provide a safe environment for all who attend Von Steuben. I took it upon myself to modify my residential design into a retrofit device that can be installed in drinking fountains. Installing directly into a fountain, utilizing its existing plumbing, meant that I can supply fresh, clean, lead-free water to my students at all times. For the last 3 years, students at Von Steuben have been using the fountains to refill their bottles and not relying on single-use bottled water. I'm going to quickly go over the before and after results of 2 pilot programs that I participated in with CPS. I donated and installed the devices in these schools myself. Orr High School, before NOAA, its average reading was 45.65 parts per billion, and its highest reading was 530 parts per billion. After installing NOAA, today the average reading is 0.840, less than 1. Onahan Elementary School, before NOAA, its highest reading was 520 parts per billion. After NOAA, 0.528, less than 1 part per billion. Katie, this is a residential install. In her home, she had readings ranging between 4.9 and 17 parts per billion. After NOAA was installed, 0.001, no detection. We can test these locations today, tomorrow, next month, next year. The results will always be the same, less than 1. In closing, NOAA is an effective, practical solution in both residential and public buildings everywhere. It works by doing 2 things. It doesn't allow water to stagnate in the pipe, and 2, it applies and maintains the orthophosphate corrosion control. It is also 100% maintenance-free, requires no filters, strainers, batteries, or clocks to program. In closing, I would like to ask for the funding for a controlled residential and school pilot program in Newark, New Jersey, and Flint. The funding values will be determined by controlled program needs. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. Next, we are going to hear from Dr. Eric Roy, the founder of Hydroviv.
Thank you, Chairwoman Cheryl and members of the subcommittee for your invitation to testify on how the federal government can better support scientists, entrepreneurs who develop technologies that detect, predict, and fix water quality issues, like the one currently underway in Newark. While today's testimony is informed by my experience working at companies that were either funded by or sold technology to EPA and Department of Defense, I'm not speaking on behalf of any of these employers or organizations. Hydroviv is a water filter company that I started in response to the Flint lead crisis. At the time, I was leading product development for a company that develops technology used by first responders and military personnel to detect chemical warfare agents and other harmful chemicals. I was able to use my experience as a chemist and connections in manufacturing to develop custom water filters that were specifically designed to handle the high lead levels in Flint, and I donated these filters to families and child-centric organizations. This wasn't really intended to be more than a charitable effort run from my apartment, but as public awareness of water quality has grown, Hydroviv's scope expanded, and the company was able to air on Shark Tank this past year. From the experience gained throughout my career, I've seen how companies working on water quality face barriers in commercializing their technology that are not encountered by those that develop solutions for other national interests like defense and homeland security. In this testimony, I will focus on 2 specific areas where I believe the federal government can help reduce these barriers. First, the first barrier I want to talk about today is a lack of access to the problem. For these high priority interests, it would be beneficial for federal agencies to take an active role in aligning academic, government, and private sector personnel in the same way that they do for defense and homeland security priorities. This deliberate alignment is different than what I've encountered with federal agencies that work on water. An example relevant to this hearing has to do with the water filters that the City of Newark distributed to families with high levels of lead in their water. Despite these filters being rated to remove lead, at first they were found to be surprisingly ineffective, and scientists from various government and academic institutions are actively conducting research on why this was the case. However, according to the scientists that I've spoken to, there's no component of their work that focuses on developing more effective filtration technologies, which is the actual problem that we need to solve. The results of these studies won't necessarily be published fully for months or even years, which means that scientists and engineers who innovate on filtration technology have to wait before they can try and recreate the problem and attempt to find a solution to it. This is a missed opportunity. The second thing I want to discuss today is a cost barrier faced by companies that transition technology from the laboratory to the community, where economies of scale can fully be realized. Cost-effective third-party validation is a major barrier to entry for water-centric technologies, especially products that are aimed at the consumer. Without cost-effective validation, technology developers struggle to establish their products as credible and distance themselves from the snake oil products that pollute this market. The organizations that government bodies point to for product validation are often cost-prohibitive for small companies and therefore act as a barrier to market entry. For security interests, the federal government reduces these barriers by establishing cost-effective programs and proving grounds that allow technology companies to validate their products under laboratory and real-world conditions. If this type of thing existed for companies working on water quality, a successful trial would establish trust and credibility between that company and the other stakeholders, and it would also open up outside investment. In turn, there would be an established path for credible diagnostic, predictive, and treatment technologies to go to market, and these innovation areas would become more attractive to outside investors. The problem would be solved. I've seen how the federal government can support companies that develop technology for national priorities, and I believe that there's a real opportunity to do this for water quality. I want to finalize by thanking everyone for their time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions and or work with members of the subcommittee on solutions to barriers that I raised today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Dr. Edwards, I want to talk about what has happened in New Jersey. Some people have lived in their homes here and their neighborhoods for a generation, and they didn't change anything at their property, but suddenly one day they're learning the water is unsafe to drink. So can you tell me for the record what changed that led to these higher levels of lead exposure?
Yes, as was the case in Washington, D.C., changes were made to the water supply to try to comply with other U.S. EPA regulations. And those changes, which reduced the risk from disinfection byproducts and bacteria, also increased the risk from lead. And in particular, what the utility did was to try to lower the pH, make it more acid, in order to reduce the danger from the bacteria and the disinfection byproducts. And as expected, that reducing of the pH or increasing the acidity made more lead go into the water.
Thank you. And Dr. Calello, a pediatrician in Flint played a big part in exposing the Flint water crisis, but she said she ran into roadblocks when she sought blood lead data from local officials. So how can we make sure that you get all the data you need to serve children's health?
Thank you for that question. I think it's important that lead levels drawn on children in general and even just the whole population be contained in a central data repository. So currently what we have in New Jersey is a pretty robust system that tracks lead levels in children, but primarily abnormal lead levels. And so I think when we want to assess risk, it's important not only to know what child had a lead level of 6 or 12 or 40, but also how many in that area had undetectable lead levels. or even just small elevations. And I think every state does this a bit differently, but requiring that the collection of lead levels be a reportable and clinical entity that is contained in a central, ideally a national data repository, would help a lot.
Thank you. And how often should at-risk families get tested?
I think as soon as an exposure is identified, that testing should happen right away. And although we have centered primarily on testing children and pregnant women, because those are certainly the populations most at risk, I think it helps for people to know if they're very concerned about their lead exposure to get a level tested. So Dr. Edwards made an important point about there being no safe level of lead exposure, and that's not really true. I mean, our bodies handle a little bit of lead in our environment all the time, but if lead accumulates in the body and shows up in the blood, that's where we say it's really not safe to have it there. At least that's when I say there's no safe level. That's what I'm referring to. So a test should happen right away, I think, when the exposure is discovered, and then we often test children every 9 to 12 months in their early childhood. If the exposure is ongoing, that testing should be more like every 3 to 6 months. And it's kind of, I think, just determine how much lead is in the environment that we have to monitor. So it's case by case.
Thank you. I yield back, and now I'd like to recognize Congressman Beyer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thank you all very much. It's been very educational this morning. Dr. Calello, first of all, thank you for helping us understand the impact of lead in the blood and its impact on IQ. It was very interesting, and just want to point out that a difference of 7 IQ points is a lot. Doesn't sound like a lot, but that's the difference between whether you go to college or not, the kind of college you go to. Just significantly moves where you are in the overall population. But in talking with some of the people who visited here today, they talked about in the city of Newark, not in Nutley or Bloomfield, but that they have had independent testing as high as 400 parts per billion of lead. Is there anything from a poison control perspective that you can offer to make sure that people feel that the respective governments are testing appropriately?
The role of the Poison Control Center is to, operate a 24/7 hotline to people with questions. And whether it's in the state of New Jersey, we actually did partner with the Department of Health to make sure that any information they wanted disseminated through the city was available at the Poison Control Center. So if any citizens wanted to know, is my address affected? How can I get testing? Where can I pick up bottled water? Where can I get my child tested? So here in New Jersey, I think the State Poison Control Center really played an important information disseminating role. That sometimes it has been the case elsewhere and not always. Does that answer the question?
Is there a connection between the lead poisoning and Legionnaires' disease?
No. Both can be a waterborne illness, but lead and Legionnaires are not connected.
Someone just pointed out that many of the deaths in Flint were due to Legionnaires.
Right.
But these are co-determined. It's not causal, I guess.
Correct. The water can be contaminated with a lot of different things, and I think there was some co-contamination, but Dr. Edwards could probably speak to that a little more.
And do we need to worry about copper? If we've solved the lead problem, as you imagine, is copper leaching an issue for all of us and our kids?
Copper does not have the developmental effects at very low levels, as far as we know scientifically. Copper in very high levels can cause health problems as well, organ damage and what have you, but it's not been observed clinically in drinking water contamination to cause illness.
Okay, all right, thank you. Mr. Ramos, thanks for telling us all about the NOAA device. Is the orthophosphate linings required ahead of time for NOAA to be effective?
As long as the districts are applying the orthophosphate at the treatment plant, no one can deliver that orthophosphate to the residents and the schools.
So those have to go together?
Yes.
Essentially, yeah. And you said that in an attempt to hold costs down, you weren't running NOAA on weekends, but you also said earlier that if the water sits for more than 6 hours, it starts to eat away at the orthophosphate. Why wouldn't you run it 24 hours, 7 days a week?
For residential, I would recommend that we do 7 days a week, 24 hours. But in the school, what I did at Von Steuben is I hooked all the devices up to the hallway lighting circuit, so it turns on only when the building is occupied. But during time, given enough time having the system running, there will be enough coating of orthophosphate that it can survive over the weekend. Monday morning, we turn the lights on, the system activates and starts replenishing it with fresh water and the orthophosphate.
And you didn't mention cost. What would it cost a home to have a NOAA device?
I'm ranging around $250.
Okay, great, thank you.
And they last for years. I've had, tomorrow's the 3-year anniversary of the very first one installed at Von Steuben High School, and it's still running today, 3 years later.
Okay, great, thank you. And one last question. Dr. Roy, you talked about how federal agencies, federal government needs to do this alignment of the scientists and bureaucrats, civil servants to make this happen faster. Can you tell the four of us who go back to legislate what that legislation would look like?
Of course. I think there's really two ways that this could happen. I think for long-term priorities, there should be programs set up that are kind of longitudinally based that, you know, around infrastructure type stuff, so you can have program managers that, you know, actively work to put those people in a room and develop long-term solutions. For short-term priorities, what I would recommend is some sort of, you know, the funding instrument are like prizes. And that allows technology developers to come in and pitch their prize, and they're able to kind of matriculate through. And the winners, it's not about the money, it's about the access to the problem and an opportunity to solve it. And I've seen this work multiple times for security and drug interdiction-based national priorities.
Thank you. I'd now like to recognize Congresswoman Wexton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the panelists for coming today and sharing with us your knowledge about this issue. And I would really be remiss if I did not use this opportunity to talk a little bit about the EPA's proposed changes to the lead and copper rule. Dr. Calello, in 2012, the CDC reduced the threshold level of blood lead level that was of concern to be elevated from 10 micrograms per deciliter to 5. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you know, so that was in 2012. At that time, the EPA's lead and copper, or lead parts per billion, was 15. And when the EPA announced that they were going to revisit that rule, a lot of us hoped that, given that the changes that the CDC had, that the EPA would also reduce that threshold. And they declined to do that. The trigger level in their proposed rule is still 15 parts per billion. Not only that, they would allow more time for water sanitation authorities to replace lead pipes. Even when that trigger level is reached, they are taking away the 7% requirement of replacement per year and replacing it with a 3% requirement. So instead of taking 13 years to replace all the lead pipes in a sanitation authority area, it would take 33 years. That is a couple generations of young people who could be living with elevated levels of lead in their blood and have the collateral consequences of that. Dr. Calello, could you speak a little bit? I know that you can't draw a straight line from 15 parts per billion to 5 micrograms per deciliter or anything like that, but could you speak a little bit to the long-term consequences in terms of brain development and development overall, IQ points and everything that happens with these elevated levels of lead in children's systems?
Just to repeat the question, it's to comment on the long-term intellectual effects of low lead levels in the blood?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. You know, the data behind looking at is a child with a lead level of even 4 or 3 below the threshold going to potentially have a developmental consequence comes from large populations. So it's impossible scientifically to demonstrate in a given child that they were normal before they had exposure and they had a developmental event as a direct result of lead exposure. It's just very difficult to do, in particular because most children, when they have discovered elevated lead levels, are in the first 2 years of their life. So what we rely on are large, reproducible population studies that demonstrate, again, in children with populations where children have elevated lead levels, and some of them are just in that very low range. Those children in that same group also have lower IQ. And that is controlled for things that also affect intellectual testing, like parental education and parental IQ and socioeconomic status. And so it is a pretty good indicator, at least on a large population-based level, of IQ deficits at low levels, at small elevations. But when I see a child with an elevated lead level, whether it's 5 or 10 or 40 or 60, I tell their parents that there is no way to predict exactly what's going to happen. Our first job is to get the lead exposure out of their environment so the level does not continue to climb. And then our next job is to watch the child closely, and if anything developmentally happens, that we can respond. The deficits are not likely fixed and a foregone conclusion. It's important to not assume that children who are exposed to lead are, damaged, automatically. So it's a little bit of a complicated risk assessment, but in individual children, I just try to provide guidance and hope and attention to where the sources are.
Thank you. Mr. Ramos, I was very interested to hear about what you have done in the Chicago Public Schools, and I am reminded of when I was growing up, my dad would always, I have a very distinct memory of him standing at the kitchen sink, running the faucet, running the tap for several minutes before he would fill the coffee pot in the morning. And I, being the budding environmentalist in first grade or whatever, would say, "Dad, why are you wasting the water like that?" And he said, "No, I need to do that to get the clean, to flush the water and make sure that there's no bad stuff there." And it turns out, it sounds like he was right. And I really appreciate what you have done for the Chicago Public Schools and beyond, and your technology. Now, you spoke about a pilot program that the schools did to test out your technology, the NOAA process. Is that something that Chicago Public Schools picked up the tab entirely for that, or was there any federal or state support available for that?
For all the pilot programs in Chicago Public School, I donated all the devices. So CPS only had to pay the plumbers and the electricians to actually do the infrastructure work.
Okay.
But the devices themselves were free to CPS and the schools.
So this sounds like a pretty good, reliable, low-cost way to mitigate the damage when lead is already present in the system. Is that
Absolutely,
correct?
I believe that it is.
Okay. Thank you very much, and
Thank
I
you.
yield back.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Congressman Payne for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Ramos, my question was going to be the cost of the system. In your remarks, you mentioned that, Congressman Byers' question, the replacement of the unit. What do you feel its life expectancy will be, and how many times will you have to replace it during a lifetime?
Well, since it's the first of its kind, I can just give the testimony on the success that we're seeing in Chicago. We've had devices running for 3 years without having replaced any of the components or the device itself. So I could say at least 3 years.
So it's still an ongoing test on how the life expectancy of the unit. So you really don't know yet, basically.
I really don't know yet, but I could say at least 3 years.
Okay. And so, and the cost of the unit would be, you're looking at a residential around $250?
That's correct.
Okay.
And we're here to work with the willing. Anyone or any district, we're willing to work with budget constraints because it is a very, very, very important topic. And anything we could do to help, I think we all need to chip in together and just get it done.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all our panel members. It's been a great hearing today and wonderful to hear from you. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members and for any additional questions the committee may ask of the witnesses. The witnesses are excused and the hearing is now adjourned. Thank you so much.